November 4, 2025, New York City elected its youngest mayor in over a century, a 34-year-old Democratic socialist, Zohran Mamdani.
The headlines called it historic and groundbreaking, celebrating a new generation taking power. But here's what the headlines buried. Voters aged 18 to 29 supported him at 72%. Voters aged 30 to 44 at 58%. Voters aged 45 to 64 at 44%. Voters aged 65 and over at just 31%. The younger the voter, the more socialist their choice. College students voted for him at 78%. Recent graduates under 30 at 72%. Graduate degree holders under 40 at 68%. This didn't happen by accident. This isn't coincidence. This is the product of a decades-long project that started in the classroom. 16 years, thousands of hours. One message repeated over and over. Capitalism equals greed. Socialism equals compassion. Individual success matters less than collective equity. And it worked. 72% of young voters just chose socialism without understanding basic economics, without learning what happened when other cities tried these same policies, without asking the critical questions that could have prevented this outcome. They didn't arrive at this conclusion independently. They were taught to arrive at this conclusion. Today, we're investigating exactly how this happened. Not theories, not opinions, but data. How elementary schools planted the seeds. How high schools watered them. How universities harvested them. What students were taught about socialism, and what they were never taught about its failures. Because if you understand how this happened in New York City, you'll recognize it happening in your city, your schools, your children's classrooms. The story begins where all conditioning starts, elementary school. During the 2010s, New York City schools, like schools nationwide, adopted something called social-emotional learning, or SEL. Parents were told it would teach empathy and cooperation harmless enough, right? But beneath this benign marketing lay something far more substantial. A comprehensive framework that prioritized collective thinking over individual achievement, promoted equity over equality by teaching children that equal outcomes matter more than equal opportunity, embedded environmental activism as a moral imperative through climate change curriculum starting in 3rd grade, and offered systemic explanations for everything, teaching kids that poverty isn't about individual circumstances, but about oppressive systems. These political frameworks were being presented as moral truths to children as young as 8. The timeline of NYC public schools reveals the systematic nature of this transformation. In 2018, the district adopted a culturally responsive education framework, essentially teaching that American institutions are inherently racist. The following year brought decolonizing the curriculum initiatives, which removed Western perspectives in favor of marginalized voices. By 2020, students as young as 4th grade were receiving critical examinations of American history, learning that America was built on oppression. This timing matters more than most people realize. Studies in developmental psychology demonstrate that political views formed between ages 12 and 14 remain remarkably stable into adulthood. This is precisely when children develop their foundational understanding of how the world works. When NYC students spend these formative years learning that America is systemically oppressive, that wealth inequality stems from capitalism, that environmental crisis requires system change, and that individual success matters less than group equity, their later socialist voting patterns become predictable rather than surprising. The critical element in this process is how these concepts are presented. They aren't offered as opinions or perspectives open to debate. They're taught as established facts. Students encounter no counterarguments, no alternative frameworks, no intellectual diversity, just one lens through which to view the world. Systemic problems require systemic solutions. Capitalism is the problem, and socialism is the answer. By age 14, before they can even vote, NYC students have been immersed in progressive ideology for nearly a decade, and the intensity only increases as they move into high school. High school serves as the reinforcement stage, where elementary foundations are solidified and expanded. The transformation of NYC high schools between 2015 and 2025 reveals a dramatic curricular shift. The old approach offered balanced views of American history, acknowledging both achievements and failures, provided civics education about how government actually functions, emphasized individual rights and responsibilities, and recognized American exceptionalism as a legitimate concept. The new approach applies a social justice lens that dominates everything, frames American history primarily as a narrative of oppression, focuses on group identity over individual rights, and presents capitalism as merely one option among many, rather than the system that created American prosperity. English and literature classes reflect this same pattern. The classic canon has been significantly reduced. Shakespeare, Dickens, and Hemingway receive less time, while diverse voices with progressive themes receive more. This isn't necessarily problematic in itself, but examining which diverse perspectives actually get included reveals the selective nature of this exposure. Books critical of capitalism are regularly assigned, while books critical of socialism are not. LGBTQ plus literature holds a prominent place, while religious conservative perspectives remain absent. This selective exposure creates predetermined conclusions rather than genuine intellectual exploration. Perhaps most tellingly, only 23% of NYC high school students take any economics course at all. When they do, market failures receive heavy emphasis, while market successes are minimized. Socialist alternatives are presented as theoretically viable, while socialist historical failures are barely mentioned or blamed on external factors. Students graduate with strong opinions about economic policy, but zero economic literacy. They do understand how wealth is created, why rent control creates housing shortages, how price controls cause shortages, why printing money causes inflation, or why tax the rich has practical limits. The teaching course itself reflects this ideological uniformity. The United Federation of Teachers, NYC's teachers union, directs 96% of its political contributions to Democrats, actively campaigns for progressive candidates, enthusiastically endorsed the socialist candidate, and spent $2.3 million in the 2025 election cycle. Teacher political registration in NYC public schools shows 84% Democrat, 11% Republican, and 5% other or independent. While good teachers can maintain objectivity regardless of personal politics, when 84% share the same ideology, that ideology is reinforced in curriculum, and opposing viewpoints are rare. You have an indoctrination system rather than an education system. Student surveys confirm the atmosphere this creates. 73% of conservative-leaning students report feeling unable to express their views without facing social or academic consequences. 42% report teachers making negative comments about Republicans, capitalism, or traditional values. By graduation, New Yorker students have spent 4 years immersed in an environment where privileged discourse is ubiquitous. Wealth equals exploitation. America equals systemic problems. Socialism equals compassion. Capitalism equals greed. And questioning these equations makes you a bad person. The data proves this system works exactly as designed. New York City high school students entering 9th grade show 42% identifying as liberal or progressive. By graduation, that figure reaches 67%, a 25-point shift over 4 years. Compare this to religious or private school students, who show only an 8-point shift, or public school students in conservative areas, who show a 5-point shift. New York City public schools produce a 25-point leftward movement. This isn't education. It's conversion, and it prepares students perfectly for the final stage, college. College represents the harvest phase of this cultivation process. If elementary school plants the seeds and high school waters them, college brings in the crop. The City University of New York system, serving 275,000 students across 23 campuses as the primary pathway to higher education for NYC residents, functions as a progressive ideological echo chamber. National studies show humanities professors identifying as liberal or far left at rates above 90%, social sciences at 85%, and political science specifically at 95%. In New York City universities, these numbers are even more extreme, with faculty voter registration showing 87% Democrat or progressive, 8% Republican, and 5% other, an 11-to-1 ratio. Course content analysis reveals what students actually learn. Mandatory diversity courses across the CUNY system include systemic racism in America, framed as fact rather than theory, gender and sexuality studies from a progressive perspective only, and capitalism and its discontents, where the outcome is predetermined. Assigned reading analysis shows socialist or Marxist thinkers like Marx, Chomsky, and Angela Davis appearing in 78% of political science courses, while free market economists like Friedman, Sowell, and Hayek appear in only 12%. Students read Marx's critique of capitalism extensively, but rarely encounter Hayek's critique of socialism. They learn socialist theory in detail, but encounter socialist reality, the USSR, Venezuela, Cuba minimally, and when they do, failures are explained away as not real socialism. Campus culture reinforces these academic patterns. Democratic Socialists of America clubs exist on every CUNY campus, while college Republicans appear on only 3 of 23 campuses and face frequent harassment. Progressive speakers are invited regularly and celebrated, while conservative speakers receive rare invitations and face protests when they do appear. Safe spaces protect students from harmful ideas, often meaning conservative viewpoints. Microaggressions often means disagreement, while hate speech expands its definition continually. This system produced Zoran Mamdani's campaign infrastructure directly. His volunteers came overwhelmingly from college campuses, with his campaign headquarters located just 200 yards from Hunter College's CUNY campus. 82% of his volunteer base consisted of current students or recent graduates, and his Get Out the Vote operation was organized through DSA college chapters. These weren't merely volunteers. They were true believers who had spent 4 years learning that capitalism is failing, socialism is the answer, and their generation must make the change.
This is the story they don't want you to hear, because if you understand how this happened in New York City, you'll recognize it happening everywhere. The question isn't whether your city's schools are doing this. The question is how far along they are in the process. If this investigation opened your eyes, share it. These patterns need exposure. These questions need answers. Drop a comment below about what you're seeing in your own city's education system. Are your kids being taught to think critically, or are they being taught what to think? And subscribe, because we'll be tracking what happens next in New York City. The experiment has just begun, and everyone needs to see where 16 years of classroom conditioning leads when it finally takes power. The data doesn't lie. The system works exactly as designed, and your children might be next.